guys, Stealth here. Eugen just launched a new map pack, giving us a few new maps, so let's have a quick look at those maps. Now the first one that I have added is Snake Pit and the second one is Crossroads. This is actually the same map, it's just different zones. So sometimes you're going to have 2 reinforcement zones and with the other one you're going to have 1 reinforcement zone. So let's spin up Crossroads and just have a look at what kind of map you can expect, what kind of gameplay we can expect from this map. Now for starters, it's a very large map. If you're going to take one of those decks which have reduced mobility, like for example the Blue Dragons or other decks that have notoriously low autonomy, you may not be able to get to where you need to go. This is a very long distance to Delta or to Hotel from Juliet, so if you're going to go to one of the flanks, make sure you have a deck that has decent mobility or decent autonomy on it. Aside from that, the main sector is worth a lot of points in this version of the map. It's 8 points for blue 4 and 8 points for red 4, of course. Then you have a very large highway running down the middle of the map. This road could be heavily fought over, and I think what you're going to see is that red 4 is going to send down a troop, let's say a column of troops towards this town. Blue 4 is going to try and capture this town, and either who has the first motorized deck to get there or the first airborne section to get there is going to have control more or less of the middle of the map. But that doesn't really say everything, because over here you still have a decent amount of cover where you can park, for example, a tank. If I was playing my British deck, I would put a Centurion AVRE up here and just make sure that any kind of infantry unit that decided to move from one building to the next would get hammered by that unit. So fire support units, tanks, recoilless rifles might be very useful up here, as well as ATGM infantry, in order to make sure that the enemy cannot just push down a tank or a transport down this road. Of course, be sure to have your AA in place, because if either side is going to send in their air support, it's going to come right down this column, unless they micromanage it and turn out to go around the flanks. So having some sort of AA over there if you're blue, or let's say over here or there if you're red, will allow you to shoot down a jet. Especially if you have, for example, a Patriot, and you can park it, let's say right there. You have a very good control of the middle of the map. Over towards the left side of the map we have India. Some of these zones are really difficult to defend. I think India is not among those. I think you can put up a decent defense here. There's a lot of open terrain around India, which means that if you put a couple of tanks here, a couple of AA units, maybe some ATGM units, you have a really good control over India. There's also plenty of tree lines that you can use to park CVs or infantry CVs in, and that way you can easily keep control of this zone. Hotel, again, a very large zone. This is probably going to be contested all the time, where there's 2 CVs in this zone, one from blue, one from red, because you have plenty of space to hide. And this tree line over here, or this forest, may not look that interesting, but I think it's going to be heavily fought over, because the moment that you can flank around the infantry forces or the main force that's held up there, and you can try to come into the rear, that means you have encircled the enemy, and possibly scored an enemy CV kill. The same, of course, can be applied for blue 4 if you push in from this side and try to come in from the right, or from, let's say, the left aft side here in Hotel. You may be able to get a sneaky spot. For both Hotel and over on the right, let's say its sister zone in Delta, I would really recommend that you have some sort of picket line. So some sort of reconnaissance. It can be just units which have poor recon, like spare helicopters, that you park either over on this position, over there, or similarly there, or let's say there. But I would prefer this sector because it's smaller. Reason for that is that these flanks leave a lot of room to maneuver, and you can expect and should expect an enemy either recon to come and probably try to spot your artillery or your command position here, or you can expect a helicopter rush. Of course, a helicopter rush is a bit more easy to see coming, and you will have enough time to see it or to reinforce your main zone if you spot it in time. Recon may not be that easy. So be sure that you cover both of your flanks here, or people like me will exploit it, and we're going to put recon, we're going to walk it down all the way around the side of the map, park it here, and if it's a sniper team, you will never know it's there until your artillery suddenly starts dying. So make sure that you have those flanks secured. Now over to the, let's say, the right sector of the map, we got Echo here. Echo is a very, very layered zone. You can see it goes quite high. You have this, let's say, lower level tree line, then a secondary level, and even a third level up here. I'm not sure what the lines of sight for this zone are going to be. I'm not sure if you put a tank up here, whether it can shoot down that road, but I'm expecting that it is not capable of doing that. It will be capable of hitting that tree line. That seems like a reasonable distance. But going from here to, let's say, there, or shooting something that's down there, I don't think your tank has enough gun depression to do that. So Echo, Alpha, Charlie, these zones may be heavily fought over by infantry. And of course, Charlie is pretty much a mirror zone from the one that we saw here in India. So this zone, you can see this, let's say, triangular shaped tree line here. You have a similar thing all the way on the other side in Charlie, this sector. Triangular shaped tree line. With a bit of, let's say, higher cover. A sort of smallish hill that you can use to put, let's say, AA. Maybe an ATGM if you want to lock down the road here. And especially I would park recon over at this far spot so you can see whatever's coming down this road, whatever's going to happen there. If the enemy might be coming out of Delta. And of course the same works in reverse in India. Aside from that, we got Gulf. In Echo, again, these zones seem pretty similar if you just rotate them a little bit and paste them on each other. Because the tree line that I just discussed, this, let's say, tertiary tree line, primary, secondary, tertiary, you have the same thing right here. 3 layers, and again, not sure how well the lines of sight are going to work for tanks, but we'll just have to experience that. Aside from that, notable terrain. There is not a lot of structures that you can capture. So the structures that are in the map are going to be crucial. Because especially a position like this is very, very potent for ATGMs. Not so much standard line infantry, because the standard line infantry doesn't have the range with their anti-tank weapon to, for example, hit that position or hit there. Where ATGMs can probably hit this, let's say this entire square. They can probably hit all over that terrain. Same goes for this sector. Make sure that if you're starting on this flank that you capture this building, because it's going to be either very useful for recon or HGMs. This one is a fallback position. This sector is not too critical. I don't really see how you could really effectively use this, because this terrain elevation means that any infantry inside this building is not going to be able to fire the HGMs over it. They have to maintain line of sight. Over on the left, a decent position, and I'm saying decent because this tree line right here is going to mess up your line of sight, which means that if your HGM troopers are in here to defend against an oncoming wave from this side, you will not see them coming. This building and this one over here are much, much better, because from here you have a very clear line of sight and you can easily spot whatever is coming down that road and jam an HGM into that target. Over on the left, no signs of buildings whatsoever. This entire road is desolate. And of course, the main sector, well, if you have to put infantry in here, that means you've pretty much already lost the match. Alright, I'm going to pause the video here and load up the other map. Alright, so that one was Crossroads. This one's called Snake Pit. Snake Pit is the map that we just saw, rotated. With a few differences, because previously I started here, where I just mentioned that if you have your infantry in this building, you've already lost the match. Right now, the map is rotated 90 degrees, and you have 2 reinforcement zones, both of which carry air routes as well. So this makes it a bit more easy for aircraft to operate safely on this terrain. This is pretty much, at least the way that I'm expecting it, going to be a standoff, where the other map might not be so standoffish. Because right now, I can see that Blue Frog can capture India, Hotel, Echo and Lima, and Red 4 can capture Fox, Delta, Bravo and Alpha. Let's say that they have the zones that I just mentioned. How can you push? Well, let's say I wanted to push from India to Alpha. I have a bit of units holed up here. I'm going to put up a smoke screen to cross the road. I'm going to try to capture this town because it's a pretty dominating position. Or it can be used to reinforce your troops with, for example, AA infantry. Then I'm going to try to hop over this trade line and then hop over to Alpha. A straight offensive from this side to the other side might work, but I would recommend you have wheeled vehicles, because the only road that you have is this small dirt track that's coming out of this tree line, which means off-road vehicles or tracked vehicles are going to have an off-road speed of 60, 70 at best, which means it's going to take them quite a long while to cross over into Alpha. Now from India you can also try and push into Bravo, but there is not a lot of cover. And the cover that is in here is probably going to be heavily fought over by infantry on infantry. Hotel de Bravo, there is a town in the way, so this town again is going to be critical. Same as this building and the other structures right there. So what you can expect from Hotel is very, very fragmented spotting, or at least that's what I'm expecting. Because you have these tree lines, and they do count as dense hedge farmland, also known as good cover. But it's very, very thin, which means it's just one row of trees. Unlike, for example, right here. This is a bit better. If I wanted to push from either side, this can be done pretty quickly with tracked vehicles or infantry. But make sure you put down smoke. Don't just rush your infantry from one side to the other, or you're going to find your infantry getting murdered very, very quickly. If you can, try and capture this town. Putting some light infantry in here, for example Gornostrelkis or light riflemen, is going to make it very effective, because you can quite effectively engage anything that's coming across this road. Over here I would just put line infantry to make sure that anything that comes down this hill is going to get shot at right away. Right here again, line infantry. ATGMs in this position I wouldn't really recommend it, because the line of sight again is pretty terrible. This is really the only building that I would consider ATGMs for, because from here you can shoot to the other side. Echo to Delta or Delta to Echo again, smoke screens and try to push across as quickly as possible. And Lima to Fox, it's not easy. It's quite a long stretch of terrain that you have to push up from. And the one first stop that I would make is try to capture this tree line. Because if you're in here, especially if you park an AA unit, which has, let's say, 4.2 kilometer range, like a Hawk, you can pretty reliably intercept enemy aircraft as they're going to be flying in, possibly turning around, and even if they are over there, you can probably still hit them. But again, capturing that tree line is not going to be easy. This town, again, has a very good ATGM position. It's pretty much the mirror image of what you can see over there. And this town, if you can capture it, by all means go for it. It's just quite far. This one seems to be favored by Red 4. It's closer to Red 4. This one seems to be favored by Blue 4. If you want to absolutely be clear that you have these zones, make sure you do it with an airborne force. So fly in with a bunch of helicopters and try to capture that terrain as quickly as possible. All in all, I would say that this map is it's decent, but I think the other version, Crossroads, is better. But we'll see how these maps pan out. And I think that while they are, let's say, meant for a 3v3, they would also work for a 10v10. But we'll see what kind of dedicated servers pop up there. Alright, there's a few other maps, so I'm going to pause it again and load up the next one. Okay, next map. This map is a 4v4, and it's called Heartbreak Ridge. If you don't recognize it because it's not in your map list, don't worry. It's actually a 10v10 map, or at least that's the way that I remember it, because over here you usually have quite a lot of fights going on if you're doing a 10v10. The map is classed as a 4v4, but I think it is way too big for a 4v4. Because let's face it, we have so many command zones here and so much terrain that you can cover that it is very hard to focus all of your attention, even if you are with 4 players, on all sectors of the map. What usually will happen is that you're going to see a few clash zones. I think the clash zones for this map might be this town, over here on the left, the tree line between Gulf and Fox, the tree line between Quebec and Hotel, this town, and maybe this tree line versus Tango. I think that is pretty much what you can expect. As far as the command zones are divided, we have a lot of income for Blue 4, a lot of income for Red 4, because you can basically capture and reliably capture Charlie, Delta, Oscar, Papa, Hotel, Foxtrot and Echo, and for Red 4 the, let's say the mirror zones, the opposing ones. If you want to make sure that you have a good position at the start of the game, try and get a helicopter rush into either this town, this industrial lot, or their mirror versions there, or there. Because if you have one of those, you have a pretty decent position, but making sure that you hold that is going to be the hard part. Because let's say that Red 4 comes in from Romeo, captures this little town in Papa. Red 4 then has a very long road to reinforce this position, whereas Blue 4 can quite easily lash out with airstrikes, come in with reinforcements pretty quickly, especially since you have all of these little inclines that vehicles and infantry can easily climb up on. Making sure that you capture it is the first part of the battle. Keeping it will be the second part. As far as flanking maneuvers are concerned, there's a large open flank here that, again, you can expect a recon rush or a helicopter rush from, so beware of both of these flanks, because if you're not, then people will abuse the shit out of that. As far as the rest of the map is concerned, I think that India, again, goes for the mirror version of it as well, Oscar. These tree lines are going to be very useful for defending oncoming or defending against oncoming waves. Same goes for Echo. Use this tree line. If you're going to rely on this town, you're going to find yourself getting flanked or not having your ATGM range optimal. So for example, putting ATGMs up here might be a better solution, because from here you can see what's coming down the road, shoot at it with a tank. Again, with an AVRE or with a CEV or similar variant, and those units will deny the area to the enemy. This town might get fought over, I'm not entirely too sure. One thing that's interesting about this map is this little lake. Normally, I would say ignore it, but in this situation I'm not so sure, because I think that you can move a vehicle down here, and if it's an amphibious vehicle, you can you can do a small amphibious landing onto this tree line. From there, hop your way over to the second tree line and then into the town. It's a different way of operating. Similarly, we have a little lake over here, again, which seems, actually this one might be a bit harder to get into. I'm not sure a vehicle can get down there, but we'll have to test that out. And over here, this of course is a pretty easy amphibious assault. So if you are holed up in Sierra and you're Red 4, don't just think that the enemy is going to come down this road or there, because they might in fact put down a smoke screen there, have you focus your attention there while they're pushing across the water and coming in from the side of the town. So be very careful about these lakes, because they may seem like a natural obstacle, but since some of these units are amphibious, they really aren't. Alright, on to the next one. Next map, Crown of Crags. It's supposed to be a refitted map, but I'm not exactly sure which one it is. I think what we're looking at is a smaller version of Asgard, where you have this town in the middle. This really reminds me of the Asgard map, but the rest of the map has been cut off, because normally I have a very large zone over to the west and to the east of this map, but those zones are no longer there. I think that this map can turn into a meat grinder very quickly, because what you basically have is one large clash zone between Gulf and Charlie, this entire town is going to constantly tear up your infantry. So if you are going to play on a map that's called Crown of Crags, make sure you have either a mechanized deck or you have enough infantry to last for days. Make sure you have your Navy SEALs, your LSTRs because they're multi-rollers, your Napalm infantry, your assault engineers, Legions, Spetsnaz. They're all going to show off in this middle zone. Now normally on a map like this, because let's say it's the 10v10 version, you have Bravo and Lima, which are reinforcement routes. You can see the tunnel coming out of the hill here. Normally this is where your units come from. Right now that's not true. Right now you only have these two routes. You got the one coming in from Delta and Fox, or Kilo and India. You do have one additional zone, which is Alpha over on the left and Hotel over on the right. And these are also land reinforcement zones, no air, just land. So make sure that if you want to try on this map, you are aware that your units may come in from Hotel. If you're fighting in Gulf and you're expecting your units to come from Fox, let's say you position them there, they may come in from Gulf. And similarly, the same goes for Alpha. Let's say you're fighting in Charlie or you want to have reinforcements come in here. The computer may decide that this way is faster. So be very, very wary about where your units are going to come from. Anyway, there's not too much to be said about this map, because I think it's a pretty straightforward meat grinder. And I'm not sure how well it's going to play. It's going to be a lot of infantry on infantry. You're probably going to see a lot of napalm, either being dropped from enemy aircraft, dropped from your aircraft, fired by the Buratino, fired by some of the other artillery units that have napalm capability. I'm not sure I'm going to particularly enjoy this map because of that. Just push troops in and hope for the best element. A little note on logistics. I would not have helicopter logistics in a deck that's going to be fighting on this map, because you're not likely to use them. On a map like this, where air and reinforcements might be hard, go in with ground supply vehicles, because they are more safe to use. Slightly safer, that is. Alright, on to the next map, because Eugen has gifted us even more. Next up, Operation Chromite. This is a revamped map that is a little greener than I remember. I believe this is Floods or Korea Rocks. I'm not entirely sure which one it is. But the way that they've put this up is that you now have more reinforcement zones. Normally, I believe the map is positioned like this, where you have Foxtrot and Juliet as reinforcement zones. India, or let's say this zone, is clashed over usually. Hotel is a reinforcement zone and Charlie is a reinforcement zone. And you can do an amphibious landing or a helicopter landing from Delta all the way over to Alpha. Now, this map has been changed. Again, rotated 90 degrees. You have two reinforcement zones, both air and land, Delta and Alpha. You got Bravo in the middle of the map, Fox on the right, and this forest or this urban area is probably going to be fought over quite heavily because it dictates who has control of Foxtrot. Juliet is likely to be an area where you're going to see a lot of infantry on infantry, possibly some AFVs with grenade launcher or autocannons to help out. Gulf, very nice ATGM position here in Gulf. Even this little house here counts as a building, so you can even use that for ATGM parking, which means that you have a good line of sight and good control over this site here. Over in Echo we also find a little bit of structures, not too many. It's going to be a little bit more difficult, although if you have HGMs, let's say somewhere along this line, you can at least reliably shoot whatever's coming down this road. This bridge is going to mess up your HGMs, likely. So make sure that you will have some backup over there to reinforce that position. Charlie over on the left, again infantry and infantry, but there's not that much cover. As far as Bravo is concerned, park some HGMs here in Bravo and you have pretty much the entire zone locked down. The one thing that you can still expect, of course, is an enemy air raid, but park some AA infantry here or an AA gun there, and you have control over the middle of the map. I'm not sure how interesting this map is going to be. It seems pretty straightforward, not really having the same, let's say, same intricacies as Snake Pit or Crossroads, but we'll see. I think it's an interesting thing. The lake here, I wouldn't worry about amphibious operations too much because they are going to take a long time. See, a small amphibious dish like this is perfect because your vehicles, if they're amphibious, are only going to travel at 45 kph maximum. This is doable. This is not, because it's going to take you way too long to get from one side to the other. And the position where from you're going, let's say you're starting off there, if you want to go all the way over there, it is quite unsafe because you have no cover whatsoever. You cannot use your vehicles to get up on this ridge, so going with an amphibious up here, I wouldn't recommend it. Over on Fox you also have a small river that's still pouring into this huge lake. Again, you can do amphibious operations here, but the same applies. You don't have a lot of cover. If you're starting out from this side, you have a decent amount of cover, but if you are starting out from this side and you're blue 4, you have a big problem because they're already on top of your spawn. And personally, I would just let them try to push across the bridges, set up a defense here, and just have them come at me, because defending is usually easier than attacking. Alright, that leaves me with one map with the grim title of Death Row. Let me load it up for you. Welcome to Death Row. Yeah, that sounded a bit weird. Okay, Death Row. The only way that I recognize this is from the campaign. And I believe it's from the campaign Climb Mountain Rotnia, where it's one of the first zones that you invade. It's pretty straightforward. You just have Charlie over here, you have Foxtrot over there, and you have 4 command zones in between. Worth 2 points, 4 points, 4 points, and 2. And this town in the middle is going to be the zone where you're going to clash over. Both zones slightly overlap the town, but the real fighting is probably going to happen here, where it's going to be decided who is going to push where. Just make sure that you zoom out every once in a while, because while this sector will be clashed over, you have a lot of room for helicopter operations. So especially if you're dealing with a larger team, make sure you cover off these approaches, because both teams have the capability to come in with an air assault and either try to drop off, for example, troops here and try to walk into Delta or Echo, or simply fly around all the way from Charlie all the way over into Foxtrot. Stuff like that can be a significant problem, so make sure you have reconnaissance units and or AA positioned either here, either in Foxtrot, Charlie, let's say this position. I'm not really sure why there's a town over here, but you can use it. Or cover off your approaches right there. Personally, I would try, if I were starting from Charlie, to have this position covered off, so that enemy infantry is going to be, let's say it's aerial enemy infantry, is going to be spotted, shot down, before the enemy infantry manages to get, for example, offloaded over there, and just casually walks all the way through the forest into my buildings. If I were starting on Foxtrot, the situation is pretty similar. You don't want them to come in through this tree line and capture your buildings, because let's face it, there's not a lot of cover here. You gotta be really, really careful. From the right flank you have a little bit of tree line, but not too much. Still, this can be a really dangerous approach, because while it may not seem like much, it is actually dense forest. So infantry, vehicles, you can hide everything you like in this tree line. The map seems to be not too big, so low mobility decks, and I'm always thinking blue dragons there, can perfectly work on this map. And actually blue dragons might even have an advantage here, because blue dragons is one of those decks that have a lot of grenade launchers, a lot of autocannons and napalm. And I think that would be a really interesting deck to try out on this map. Alright, time to quit out of the maps and time to have a look at some of the other changes, because the maps are not the only things that have changed. There is a bit more going on, and that's going to happen in the armory. Now I'm not going to go over all of the changes, For example, autocannon noise increased by 20%. That's not really too interesting. Light support or light supply vehicles are now available in airborne decks, which means that, let's say I was using a US airborne. Here we go, US airborne. My logistics tab now includes cargoes. These are light supply units. Previously, you only had helicopters if you had an airborne deck. Aircraft fuel level reordered according to their real stats, with weapon load taken into account, time over target normalized to match that fuel load. That may mean that some of these aircraft now have a lower or a higher time over target, or it might just be a purely cosmetic change, whereas the fuel levels can now correspond with the time over target. I don't think that's too interesting. What is interesting is the tank guns. These have gotten a pretty interesting accuracy buff. If you have a tank, and let's say it's the AGS, you're firing at 2275 meter range, then you have 65% accuracy. If you close to 2100 meter range, you have a +5 accuracy boost. If you're close to within 1925 meter range, you have a +10% accuracy boost. So these things, as they get closer, they're going to have a lot more accuracy. This was already the case, so I'm not exactly sure what these numbers were, but make sure that you're aware of the accuracy as the tanks get closer. Blue MG3 used to be used by line infantry. Time between bursts increased from 5 to 8 seconds. Now I'm not sure if you've ever been subject to Jaeger spam. Let's see, that's the LMG3. I actually want the base Jaeger. These guys have the MG3, and what I'm reading from the patch notes is that these guys have a slight nerf to them, because the burst is not going to fire every 5 seconds, it's going to fire every 8 seconds. How much that matters remains to be seen, but you could say that they had their firepower from the machine gun slashed by 50%, since a burst every 5 seconds or every 8 seconds is rather significant. Both the AVRE, or the AVRE, and the CEV dispersion have been increased. Now, the AVRE, one of my favorite units, and you don't find it there, you find it under vehicles. This one, the dispersion is the chance that you're going to hit the target, or if you don't hit the target, how far it's going to land from your intended target. The dispersion has been increased, which means that the shell is going to land farther from the target even when it misses. So make sure that if you use these, you may want to use 2 in order to get a better chance to hit your target. The Garner Strelkies have had a slight nerf, in the sense that I believe they had access to the BTR-90. BTR-90 access has been revoked, and they're back to the BTR-70 as their best transport. So if you have one of those in your decks, make sure you revisit that deck and check if they are still in the transport that you want them to be in, because maybe you're going to have to adjust that deck and find a more suitable transport for them. The French Legion, I believe that's the base Legionnaires, they have been buffed. Their price has gone down from 25 to only 20 points. Mind you, that goes for the base Legionnaires, not the Legionnaire 90. They have still the price tag of 25. Another interesting change, the SBS has been changed. The Special Boat Service does no longer carry the M72 Law, which was a pretty terrible anti-tank weapon. They now carry the M2 Carl Gustav. So they have a significant boost to accuracy, significant boost to armor penetration, and even a boost to range, because that range used to be 525. I'm going to skip over some other stuff, except that the Buratino's aim time has gone up from 15 to 20 seconds. Not really sure how well that's going to impact the game. It may mean that you cannot fire this beast as often as you like. Aside from that, it may be a bit easier to kill it if you see that it's lining up to fire. You now have 5 additional seconds to do that. Will that break the game? Will that break the Buratino? I don't think so. I think that this is still a very, very dangerous platform. Now, quite a few of the tanks have been getting a buff, or at least a change. Chinese tanks have mostly gotten an accuracy upgrade, and I'm talking about the ZTZ line. The 59-2 the 59-2A, the 85-2, the 85-2A I believe as well. These have all gotten an accuracy buff by 5%, which is nice, because let's face it, if your tank can hit the target, that would be really useful. Same goes for the T-72M1 Jaguar, the T-72M1 from East Germany, T-62s, T-64, T-64BM. All of those units have gotten an increase in accuracy by 5%. Now, one of the units that I previously was looking at, I skipped over that, but their price has gone up. The M8 used to cost you 50, is now 55 points. Nanayon Shiki, which is those very fast firing Japanese tanks. These used to fire in bursts of 4. They still do that, but the reload time after that 4-shot burst has gone up from 10 to 12 seconds. So it's 2-second change. Now, something that I'm personally quite happy with is the way that they have treated the British, because the Challengers have gotten a price buff in the sense that the tank is now cheaper. So the Mark II used to cost 130, now 125. The Mark II, or actually the Mark III, I think they mean, used to cost you 155, is now 150. Aside from that, the Soviet BTR-90 has been changed yet again. I think that those things were spammed a bit too much. The BTR-90 has been increased in price from 25 to 30, and availability decreased by 1 per card. So you're not going to be able to put out as many of these vehicles. BMP-3 has been changed a little bit. If you're not familiar with the vehicle, it's a fire support vehicle / infantry carrier coming with the Motostoke 90. These things now carry 4 Arcan missiles instead of 6, which means 2 potentially less targets or 2 potential less kills for your vehicle. The BMP-2 has been buffed. The BMP-2 has an autocannon. The range used to be 1575, has been buffed to 1750. I'm just not sure which BMP that is, because while it is in the patch notes, I cannot exactly see that change reflected in the unit stats, which is a bit unusual. Aside from that, we got the Martyr 2, which has been made more expensive. Martyr 2 will now cost you a whole lot of 40 points. We used to be 35. They seem to keep changing the Vickers Mark 11. The Vickers Mark 11, of course, is this long-range patrol vehicle. This one used to be 2 cards. I believe it's now 1 card. They used to be 50 points. They are now 45 points, so they're cheaper. I'm not sure when the balancing for this vehicle is going to stop. They just keep adjusting it. So we'll have to see how well this is going to play out. Now, a rather significant change, and not for the better as far as I'm concerned, happened to the Akula, the KA-50. The KA-50 used to have these 12 Vickers missiles. They still carry all 12. But the change is that they used to have a range of 2975. That's now 2800. Not only that, but they also fire 2 missiles instead of 1. So compare that, for example, to the longbow. The longbow does the same thing. The longbow fires 2 missiles instead of just 1. But I think that right now the KA-50 Akula is ridiculously expensive for what it can do, because I would happily pay that price of 150 if I have a helicopter that has a range of 2975. Because with a range of 2975, I can reliably stay outside the range of most AA units. Right now, I can no longer do that, because most AA guns have a range of 2800. So the Akula is now a lot more vulnerable. Aside from that, I used to be able to pick off 12 separate targets. Now I can only pick off 6. And these missiles are very expensive. The missile accuracy has been buffed slightly. The accuracy used to be 50% and 40% stabilized. It has been changed to 70% while hovering and 35% stabilized. So the stabilizer got nerfed, the hovering stability or the hovering accuracy got buffed. But still, this thing is, I'm not going to say no longer competitive, but compare that to the longbow. The longbow, which has exceptional optics versus medium optics, it can fly farther. It has the same amount of armor, but the main gun on the Apache seems to carry a lot more rounds, 1200 versus 450. The Apache does not get the Igla, but what you do get is 16 fire and forget Hellfires. The Akula only gets 12. With the Apache you can reliably kill 8 targets, because you fire and forget these Hellfires and they hit the target. You usually fire 2 unless you really micromanage this unit, which means, let's say, 8 dead tanks. The Akula, for the same price, does only get medium optics. It does get AA. It only can kill really 6 targets, if it can hit them safely. Its autocannon doesn't have as many rounds, so altogether, I think the Akula just isn't that good anymore. If you compare it to, let's say its competitor, the Mi-28, the Mi-28 still has the range, still has the accuracy that it used to have, which is only 10% less. It has a stabilizer, which is better than the one from the Akula. It does not carry AA missiles, it does not carry these Iglas, which are, let's face it, really useful. But it does have very accurate rocket pods. And you have 16 Attacker missiles, which means that you can, considering that the Mi-28 does not fire these in burst fire of 2, you can now use these to pick off 16 different targets, instead of the 6 different targets from the Akula. So, my opinion is that this buff to the Akula was unjust. I don't think that it needed this much of a nerf. And I think I'm going to remove it from my decks. Unless I'm going with a very dedicated airborne deck. And I want this thing as a superior tank killer. Because if you fire 2 missiles that each do 26 damage to armor, and the vehicle that's behind that armor, you are very likely to kill super heavies. Whereas the Mi-28 might not get the kill as fast as the Akula can. Aside from that, I think that the Mi-28 can do everything better, except AA, of course. Now, the final change that I wanted to highlight has to do with a US aircraft. The Tomcat is back. The Tomcat is in the air tab now. This is going to change the air game for Blue 4 a little. People have been screaming and shouting and kicking and all sorts of stuff that this is completely overcompensating for Blue 4's lack of an interceptor. People have been saying that the Tomcat's going to break the game. I don't think so. I really don't think so. I think it's a nice addition, but for 155 points, you get only a long-range interceptor. You don't really get a short-range dogfighter. It can do that, but the turn radius isn't that good. ECM isn't that good. Really, the only gimmick that this thing has is a very long-range, 12.5 kilometer range missile, the AIM-54 Phoenix. If this thing hits you, you will notice, because it does 8 HE power damage. Aside from that, more often than not, this thing will miss. What it also means is that the US, if you are playing as the US and you're on a naval map, you can now have the multiple Tomcats. Because you can have the Tomcat right here in the air tab as well as in the naval tab. Which means that if you really wanted to, and you're flying a US airborne deck, you can have 4 Tomcats patrolling the skies, which will completely lock down the enemy aircraft, but you are still at risk from enemy air platforms. So if you want to use this aircraft, stay behind your own AA net, or you may be sorry. Aside from that, having these things, and let's see, let's say that I was going to play a US airborne deck. How much veterancy would they have? Plane, Tomcat. I can have 2 hardened or 1 elite. 1 elite is going to give me plus 32% accuracy, and that's not a flat 32%, that's 32% of 40, which means I can now fire these missiles with a reliable accuracy of, let's say, 52 to 60%. And that's at elite. I can get 1 per card, or 2 at hardened. If I have this and this, I have a pretty damn powerful air patrol. And that's not even counting the other fighters that I can field, such as, for example, any of the Eagles. I can fire up my F-16 Block 52s to provide additional air support. Stuff like this may pose a problem. I'm not sure how much of a problem it's going to be. We'll just have to see and check out what the game has for us and how people will be using these things. Anyway, that's it for this review. Let me know what you think of these changes. Let me know what you think of the new maps. I'm going to be trying to get new footage of the new maps as soon as possible, so you know how these play and what my experiences with them are. But for now, I'm really interested in what you have to say about these maps. Do you like them? What do you think of the changes? What do you think of the Tomcat? Good? Bad? Let me know in the comments. Hope it was useful to you. If it was, please give it a like. Aside from that, I'll be seeing you next video.